BJ's name has never entered the Whittaker home quietly. It doesn't arrive like a visitor knocking at the door. It seeps in through whispers, through half-finished sentences, through the way Larry's shoulders stiffen when the phone lights up in his hand. For Betty, BJ's presence has always been a warning sign, a signal that the fragile balance holding the family together is about to be tested again. Betty has spent her life managing damage before it becomes visible. Long before cameras, headlines, and outsiders, she learned how to read danger in small shifts. A tone of voice, a look held too long, a silence that lingers where conversation should be. And lately, every one of those signs points back to BJ. BJ is not just a relative drifting in and out of the family orbit. She is history. Not the kind written down, but the kind that lives in memory and muscle, in fear responses and sleepless nights. Every time BJ resurfaces, something follows. Conflict, exposure, chaos. And Betty knows this because she has lived through it more than once. The Whittakers have survived for generations by keeping their world small. They learned early that attention is dangerous, that curiosity leads to judgment, and judgment leads to consequences they don't control. Betty became the unofficial gatekeeper of that small world. She kept outsiders at arm's length. She smoothed over conflicts before they spilled out. She carried secrets not because she wanted to, but because she believed secrecy was the only way the family stayed intact. BJ threatens all of that. Betty doesn't hate BJ in the way outsiders might expect. It's not rage that keeps her awake at night. It's dread. Dread built from patterns she's watched repeat themselves over and over. BJ doesn't just stir trouble accidentally. She draws it in. She invites it. And when things fall apart, BJ never stays long enough to clean up the wreckage. That task always falls to Betty. Lately, the signs have been impossible to ignore. Larry's behavior has changed. He's distracted, defensive, quicker to anger. His phone never leaves his side. He steps outside to take calls he used to answer openly. When Betty asks simple questions, he deflects or shuts down. And Betty knows what that means. Secrets are back in play. The house feels different now. Not louder, not more chaotic, but tense. Like everyone is waiting for something to happen, but no one wants to name it. Timmy paces more than usual, his movements restless and sharp. Lorraine's rocking has taken on a frantic rhythm that Betty recognizes as anxiety, even if Lorraine can't put words to it. The air itself feels heavy, like it's pressing down on everyone inside. Betty tries to keep routine steady. Meals at the same times. Chores done the same way. Familiar rhythms that have always helped the family feel anchored. But routines can't hold against what BJ brings with her. Because BJ doesn't just disrupt the present. She digs into the past. Betty remembers the last time BJ was deeply involved in their lives. She remembers the arguments that erupted out of nowhere. The things BJ said in moments of anger that should never have been said out loud. The way she hinted at family truths like they were leverage, not wounds. Betty remembers standing between BJ and the rest of the family, trying to de-escalate, trying to keep things contained while everything spun out of control anyway. And now it's happening again. What scares Betty most isn't just that BJ is back in contact with Larry. It's what BJ knows. Secrets BJ has collected over years. Stories twisted just enough to sound explosive to outsiders. Details that, taken out of context, could destroy what little dignity the family has left. BJ has always understood the power of information. She knows which truths shock people and which silences keep them curious. For a family already under constant scrutiny, that knowledge is dangerous. Betty has heard enough fragments to know BJ isn't just calling to check in. She's making plans. Talking about money. Talking about options. Talking about decisions that don't belong to her. And each time Larry listens instead of shutting it down, Betty feels the ground shifting under her feet. She wants to confront him, demand answers, force everything into the open. But she knows Larry too well. Cornering him will only drive him deeper into BJ's influence. Larry has always struggled with guilt, with loyalty, with the idea that turning someone away makes him responsible for what happens next. BJ knows that. She has always known exactly which emotional strings to pull. Betty carries a different kind of guilt. Hers comes from responsibility, from knowing that if things fall apart, the fallout will land on people who can't protect themselves. On Timmy, on Lorraine, on the younger ones who don't fully understand why the world keeps intruding on their lives. Betty sees herself as the last line of defense, and that weight is exhausting. At night, when the house finally goes quiet, Betty lies awake replaying conversations in her head. She wonders what BJ has promised Larry this time. Money? Escape? She wonders what BJ wants in return. Access? Control? Information? BJ has never done anything without expecting something back. The fear isn't abstract anymore. It's specific. Betty worries about outsiders showing up again, about stories being told without context, about authorities asking questions that don't have simple answers, about decisions being made over the family's heads while they struggle just to understand what's happening. She's seen how quickly things can spiral once attention returns. Once people start watching, everything becomes evidence. Every mess, every argument, every moment of confusion. BJ knows how to light that fuse. Betty also knows something else that scares her even more. Larry is tired. Tired of being judged. Tired of carrying responsibility. Tired of feeling trapped. And when people are tired, they make choices they wouldn't normally make. Choices that promise relief but deliver destruction. BJ represents an escape to him. A voice saying there's another way. Betty sees that danger clearly, even if Larry can't. She starts paying closer attention. Listening more carefully. Watching where Larry goes, who he talks to, how often BJ's name slips into conversations before being cut short. She notices small changes in the family's dynamics. How Timmy flinches when he hears certain words. How Lorraine grows more agitated on days Larry spends time away from the house. The truth is pressing closer, and Betty can feel it. BJ's secrets aren't just personal. They're structural. They threaten the entire foundation of the Whittakers' world. And Betty knows that once those secrets are spoken out loud, they can't be taken back. They'll belong to everyone. To strangers. To commentators. To people who don't care about consequences. Betty doesn't want to protect lies. She wants to protect people. But BJ doesn't see the difference. What hurts most is realizing that Larry, the one person Betty has always relied on, may already be choosing a different path. Not out of malice, but out of weakness. Out of fear. Out of exhaustion. And BJ is counting on that. Betty stands at a crossroads she never wanted to face. She can continue holding everything together, hoping the storm passes. Or she can confront the truth head-on, knowing that doing so may shatter the family she's spent her life protecting. She knows one thing for certain now. BJ's secrets won't stay buried. They're already surfacing in whispers, in tension, in the way the house itself seems to hold its breath. The question is no longer whether the truth will come out. The question is how much damage it will do when it does. And whether Betty can survive being the one forced to face it first. What do you think is really driving BJ's return, and do you believe Betty can stop what's coming, or is the truth already too close to contain? Comment below. Betty doesn't sleep much anymore. When she does, it's light and fractured, the kind of rest that leaves her more tired than before. Her mind stays alert, listening for footsteps, for voices, for the soft buzz of Larry's phone lighting up in the dark. Every sound feels like a warning. Every silence feels loaded. She has started measuring time differently. Not in days or weeks, but in moments when BJ's influence creeps closer. A call here. A visit there. A conversation that ends too abruptly. Betty notices everything now because she has to. She knows that once BJ gains momentum, things move fast, and the people who suffer most are the ones least able to understand what's happening. Betty thinks often about the cost of knowing. For years, she believed ignorance was a form of protection. If certain things stayed unspoken, maybe they couldn't hurt anyone. But BJ doesn't operate by that logic. BJ weaponizes truth. She knows which stories cause outrage, which details sound sinister without context, which fragments can be stitched together into something explosive. And that terrifies Betty more than outright lies ever could. The hardest part is watching Larry drift. Not physically, but emotionally. He used to talk things through with Betty, even when they disagreed. Now he keeps his distance, his answers clipped, his explanations vague. When she asks where he's been, he says, out. When she asks who he talked to, he shrugs. Betty recognizes that pattern. It's the same one she's seen in men who feel cornered, who think silence buys them time. But silence never buys time. It only builds pressure. Timmy senses it too. He doesn't articulate it clearly, but his behavior tells the story. He shadows Betty more than usual, lingering near her whenever Larry steps outside. His pacing grows sharper when BJ's name comes up, his body responding before his words ever could. Betty knows Timmy remembers more than people give him credit for. Trauma has a way of imprinting itself deeply, especially when no one ever explains it. Lorraine, too, has been more unsettled. Her rocking is faster, her sounds more urgent. Betty has learned to read those cues over decades. This isn't random agitation. This is fear. Lorraine doesn't know BJ by name the way Betty does, but she remembers the energy, the disruption, the feeling that safety is slipping away. Betty carries the weight of all of it. She starts piecing together fragments she's overheard. Mentions of money, of documents, of fixing things once and for all. Phrases BJ has used before, always just vague enough to sound helpful, always specific enough to be dangerous. Betty understands what those words usually mean in practice. They mean decisions being made without consent. They mean shortcuts that leave others exposed. They mean consequences someone else will have to live with. One afternoon, Betty notices Larry cleaning out old papers. Not in a careful, organized way, but hastily, as if trying to find something specific. When she asks what he's doing, he snaps back sharper than he intends to. The apology comes quickly, but the damage is done. That edge tells her everything she needs to know. BJ isn't just talking. She's pushing. Betty begins to understand that she is no longer just dealing with a person. She's dealing with a plan. BJ has always been good at inserting herself into moments of vulnerability. She appears when people are tired, overwhelmed, desperate for change. And right now, the family is exhausted. The years of attention, judgment, and instability have taken their toll. Betty knows BJ sees that exhaustion as opportunity. What keeps Betty up at night is the thought of outsiders being invited back into their lives through BJ. Not journalists or filmmakers necessarily, but people with agendas. People who see the Whittakers not as human beings, but as leverage, as stories, as resources to be exploited. BJ has flirted with those worlds before, and it never ended well. Betty starts quietly preparing, not in dramatic ways, but in small, practical ones. She makes copies of important papers. She keeps notes of dates and conversations. She listens carefully when Larry talks, even when he thinks she's distracted. She doesn't confront him yet. She's waiting for the right moment, the one where denial won't be an option. The emotional toll is heavy. Betty feels isolated even within her own home. She can't fully confide in Lorraine. Timmy understands fear but not strategy. And Larry, once her closest ally, now feels like someone standing on the other side of a widening gap. BJ has always thrived in those gaps. Betty wonders if Larry realizes how much power he's handing over. Or if BJ has framed it all as temporary. Just until things get better. Just until the pressure eases. BJ has always promised relief without explaining the cost. One evening, Betty overhears enough to know the situation is accelerating. Larry's voice is low but intense. He's repeating BJ's words back to her, as if rehearsing them. They don't need to know. It's for the best. We can handle it. Betty feels a chill settle in her chest. Those phrases aren't Larry's. They're BJ's. She recognizes the cadence, the justification wrapped in concern. She realizes then that this isn't just influence. It's manipulation. Betty confronts the reality she's been avoiding. Waiting longer won't protect anyone. The longer BJ stays embedded, the harder it will be to undo whatever she sets in motion. And if things collapse, it won't be BJ facing the fallout. It will be the people who live in that house. The people who can't navigate systems, defend themselves publicly, or understand why strangers suddenly have power over their lives. That night, Betty makes a decision. She won't rush in shouting. She won't explode in anger. But she will confront Larry with clarity, not accusation. She will force him to look at the pattern they've lived through before. She will remind him of what happened the last time BJ was allowed too close. When she finally speaks to him, her voice is steady but firm. She tells him what she sees, what she fears, what she knows BJ is capable of. She tells him she won't carry this alone anymore. Larry listens, but his reaction isn't relief. It's defensiveness. He insists BJ is different now. That she's trying to help. That Betty is overreacting. Betty hears the words but recognizes the script. BJ has always framed opposition as paranoia, as fear, as refusal to change. The conversation ends unresolved, and that frightens Betty more than an argument would have. Because unresolved means Larry is still undecided. And BJ only needs time to tip the balance. Betty feels the clock ticking. She understands now that BJ's secrets don't threaten the family because they're shocking. They threaten the family because BJ uses them to control outcomes, to steer decisions, to push people into corners where compliance feels like the only option. Betty doesn't know exactly what BJ is planning, but she knows the shape of it. It involves removing choice. It involves creating a narrative BJ can control. And once that narrative exists, the Whittakers will lose whatever agency they still have. The realization is sobering. Betty has spent her life protecting the family from the outside world. Now she may have to protect them from someone on the inside. She looks around the house, at the worn furniture, the familiar routines, the fragile peace she's fought to preserve. She knows it isn't perfect, but it's theirs. And BJ threatens to take that away in ways that can't be reversed. The truth is no longer something Betty can manage quietly. It's pressing outward, demanding action. And for the first time, she accepts that facing the truth may mean losing control of the outcome. But doing nothing would mean losing everything. As BJ's influence tightens and Larry's resolve wavers, Betty stands at the edge of a choice she never wanted. Speak up and risk collapse now, or stay silent and guarantee it later. Which path would you take if protecting your family meant confronting a truth that could destroy it? Comment below. Betty wakes before dawn, the house still wrapped in that uneasy quiet that has become familiar. She sits at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee she barely touches, staring at the same spot on the wall where the paint has peeled for years. It feels symbolic now. Something worn thin from pressure, ready to give way. She knows part 3 of this story isn't about BJ alone anymore. It's about what happens when denial becomes a choice. And Larry is standing right in the middle of that choice. Over the next few days, Betty notices subtle but unmistakable shifts. Larry isn't just talking to BJ. He's acting on her influence. Small things at first. He moves items without telling her. He discourages Timmy from sitting near the camper. He starts speaking in terms of later and soon, phrases that suggest plans already forming elsewhere. Betty feels the ground slipping beneath her feet. She begins to understand that BJ isn't pushing from the outside. She's positioning herself as indispensable. She frames herself as the only one willing to handle things, the only one brave enough to confront outsiders, the only one who understands how the world really works. It's a familiar tactic. BJ thrives when others feel overwhelmed. She offers certainty in exchange for control. Betty hears it in Larry's voice now. When he talks about problems, he talks like someone repeating instructions. When Betty asks direct questions, he deflects with vague reassurances. He tells her not to worry, that everything is being taken care of, that she doesn't need to stress herself. That phrase hits Betty hard. You don't need to stress yourself. It sounds like concern, but Betty recognizes it as dismissal, as removal, as the first step toward sidelining her. She realizes BJ isn't just threatening the family's stability. She's threatening Betty's role within it. Betty has always been the anchor, the organizer, the one who knows where things are, how routines work, who needs what and when. BJ's presence disrupts that balance deliberately. By isolating Larry emotionally, by making Betty seem overly cautious or fearful, BJ is reframing authority. And it's working. Timmy becomes increasingly anxious. He clings to familiar habits, repeating motions more frequently, reacting sharply to raised voices. Betty notices that whenever BJ's name comes up, his agitation spikes. He may not understand the details, but his body remembers the chaos BJ brings. Lorraine's distress becomes harder to soothe. Her sounds take on a sharper edge, her movements more erratic. Betty knows this isn't random. Lorraine senses instability the same way animals do. The environment has shifted, and her nervous system is reacting. Betty feels guilt creeping in. Not because she caused this, but because she sees it happening and hasn't stopped it yet. She starts asking herself hard questions. What if confronting BJ directly makes things worse? What if pushing Larry forces him to choose sides? What if the family fractures beyond repair? But then she asks a harder one. What if she does nothing? The answer is clear. Doing nothing gives BJ time. And time is BJ's greatest weapon. Betty decides to test the boundaries. She calmly tells Larry she wants to be included in any decisions moving forward. She doesn't accuse. She doesn't raise her voice. She simply states it as fact. Larry bristles. He says she's overthinking, that she should trust him. Betty has trusted Larry her entire life. But trust without transparency isn't trust. It's submission. And BJ is counting on Betty accepting that. Later that night, Betty overhears part of a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. Larry is outside, voice low, agitated. He's repeating BJ's words again. She doesn't need to know yet. It'll just upset her. We'll tell her after. After what? That question echoes in Betty's mind long after Larry comes back inside. She realizes then that decisions are already being made without her. Significant ones. Decisions that affect everyone. The betrayal cuts deep, not because Larry is malicious, but because he's being manipulated into believing secrecy is kindness. BJ has convinced him that protecting Betty means excluding her. And that is perhaps the most dangerous lie of all. Betty feels something shift inside her. Fear gives way to resolve. She remembers every time she cleaned up the mess after BJ left chaos behind. Every time she picked up emotional pieces while BJ moved on. She remembers how outsiders reacted, how quickly blame fell on the family, how little protection they received. She won't let that happen again. Betty begins documenting everything. Dates, statements, changes in behavior. Not because she wants conflict, but because she understands accountability matters. If BJ's plans involve outsiders, paperwork, or authority figures, then details will matter. Silence will no longer protect them. She also begins speaking more openly to Timmy in ways he can understand. Reassurance, routine, consistency. She makes sure he knows she's not going anywhere. That whatever happens, she's still here. She does the same with Lorraine, grounding her with familiar activities, predictable rhythms. But Larry remains the biggest unknown. Betty confronts him again, this time more directly. She tells him she knows decisions are being made without her. She tells him she knows BJ is pushing for something big. She tells him she will not be cut out of choices that affect her life and the lives of the people she's cared for. Larry reacts with anger, then guilt, then confusion. BJ has pulled him into a space where every option feels wrong. Betty sees it on his face. He's torn between loyalty and fear, between familiarity and change. But Betty refuses to back down. She tells him plainly that BJ's history speaks for itself. That chaos follows her. That secrecy has never saved this family. That if he continues down this path, the consequences won't be abstract. They'll be real, immediate, and devastating. Larry doesn't respond right away. He asks for time. Time again. Betty knows time favors BJ. But she also knows pushing too hard could drive Larry further into isolation. She agrees to give him space, but she makes one thing clear. She will not stay silent. Not anymore. The tension in the house becomes palpable. Conversations feel staged. Movements feel watched. Betty senses that BJ knows she's being challenged, even if they haven't spoken directly. BJ thrives on control, and resistance threatens that. Betty understands now that this isn't just about protecting the family from BJ's secrets. It's about protecting them from the power BJ gains when secrets are allowed to dictate choices. As part 3 of this story unfolds, Betty stands at a crossroads. She has stepped out of passive protection and into active resistance. That choice comes with risks. It may fracture relationships. It may invite scrutiny. It may accelerate the very collapse she fears. But for the first time in a long while, Betty feels something stronger than fear. Clarity. She knows who she is. She knows what she's protecting. And she knows that BJ's influence only survives when people stop questioning it. The next move won't belong to BJ alone. It will belong to everyone who decides whether silence is safer than truth. If you were in Betty's place, would you keep pushing even if it meant tearing open wounds that never healed? Or would you step back and hope the storm passes? Comment below. Betty doesn't sleep much anymore. When she does, it's shallow, fractured by the same looping thoughts. Every choice feels like a fuse burning shorter. She knows part 4 isn't about suspicion or tension anymore. It's about consequence. The first real consequence arrives quietly. Larry stops pretending nothing is wrong. He doesn't announce it. He doesn't apologize. But Betty notices the shift immediately. He stops leaving the house for long stretches. He stops taking calls in the dark. The phone stays on the table more often than in his hand. It's subtle, but Betty has lived her whole life reading what isn't said. BJ's grip is loosening. Not because Larry suddenly sees the truth clearly, but because the cost of secrecy is becoming impossible to ignore. The family is unraveling in front of him. Timmy's anxiety has reached a point where even Larry can't brush it off. Lorraine's distress is no longer background noise. It's constant, disruptive, unavoidable, and Betty is no longer absorbing the damage in silence. She speaks up when routines are disrupted. She asks questions out loud. She corrects misinformation immediately. Not harshly but firmly. BJ's power has always depended on being the loudest voice in the room or the only voice at all. Betty is removing that advantage piece by piece. BJ senses it. Her messages become sharper. Her tone more urgent. She pushes Larry to make decisions faster, to commit before doubt can settle. She frames everything as now or never. That's when Betty understands something critical. BJ is running out of leverage. People who manipulate rely on momentum. Once that momentum stalls, their influence weakens. Betty sees the cracks forming in BJ's strategy. The certainty BJ once projected is slipping, replaced by impatience. Betty uses that. She doesn't confront BJ directly. She doesn't need to. Instead, she focuses on grounding the household. She reinforces structure. She reclaims small decisions that had quietly been taken from her. Meals. Schedules. Who comes and goes. Familiarity becomes her shield. Larry notices. One evening, he finally sits down across from her at the kitchen table. No phone. No excuses. Just exhaustion. He admits he felt overwhelmed. That BJ made him feel like action was better than stagnation. That he thought he was protecting everyone by keeping things moving. Betty listens without interrupting. When he finishes, she tells him something he wasn't expecting. You weren't protecting us. You were protecting yourself from feeling powerless. The words land hard, but they're not cruel. They're honest. She explains that fear doesn't disappear when you give control to someone else. It just changes shape. And BJ's version of control always comes with collateral damage. Larry doesn't argue. That tells Betty more than any apology could. The truth comes out in pieces over the following days. BJ had been pushing for decisions that would have permanently altered the family's autonomy. Legal language Larry didn't fully understand. Agreements framed as solutions but structured like traps. Promises of stability that required surrendering control. Betty feels both anger and relief. Anger that it got this far. Relief that it didn't go further. She realizes how close they came to losing more than just peace. They came close to losing voice. Agency. BJ doesn't disappear quietly. She lashes out when she realizes her influence is waning. Accusations. Guilt. Emotional manipulation. She paints herself as the victim, claims betrayal, insists she was the only one trying to help. It's familiar. Predictable. But this time, it doesn't land. Larry doesn't respond the way he used to. He doesn't rush to reassure. He doesn't chase the argument. He sets boundaries, clumsy at first, but real. He tells her decisions will be made as a family. That Betty will be involved. That secrecy is no longer acceptable. BJ doesn't take that well. She threatens to expose things. To talk. To bring outsiders in. Betty hears about it and feels a flicker of fear, but it doesn't consume her. Because she understands something BJ doesn't. Secrets lose power when you're no longer afraid of them. Betty has spent decades living under the weight of things she couldn't say. But she's no longer protecting illusions. She's protecting people. And that difference matters. When BJ finally leaves the property, it isn't dramatic. No shouting. No confrontation. Just distance. The kind that signals the end of leverage. The house feels different afterward. Not lighter exactly, but clearer. Timmy calms. Slowly. His movements soften. He sleeps longer. Lorraine's distress eases into familiar rhythms. The constant edge dulls. Betty notices these changes the way someone notices weather shifting. Gradual. Larry struggles with guilt. Betty sees it, but she doesn't shame him for it. She reminds him that manipulation preys on vulnerability, not stupidity. That acknowledging mistakes is how cycles end, not how they repeat. The family doesn't heal overnight. There are still fractures. Still tension. Still the long shadow of what almost happened. But the threat has changed shape. It's no longer external and looming. It's internal and manageable. Betty feels older, but also steadier. She knows the world may still watch, may still judge, may still misunderstand. But she also knows something else now. Silence is not the same as safety. And secrecy is not the same as protection.